And so our next speaker has flown all the way from America to be with us today to share his new research, which isn't really that much about giants. It is a little bit. But this is the book Jim and I put out a year or two ago, Giants on Record, which you can grab outside. We've got some limited edition hardbacks. But before I introduce Jim, I just want to mention something that Jim and I are involved with in January. We're taking a group out to Mexico because we're absolutely fascinated by the Olmec and the Maya sites. And we've got Brian Forrester, who's an expert on all this kind of stuff, with us. And we're going to be investigating giant remains and legends and stories that we've uncovered out there. So if anyone would like to join us, please talk to us today, because booking closes like in a week or so on the 15th. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you there. We've got a brilliant itinerary, and we hope you can. So Jim Vieira has come from America. Jim is a stonemason. He's a giantologist. He's also now an Atlantologist. Studies the ancient esoteric teachings of many different people, including Edgar Cayce, which is really the focus of his talk today. He's been involved and created, really, Search for the Lost Giants, a TV show, and a couple of other amazing shows about Roanoke, the Lost Colony. And there's another show actually in the pipeline, which is hoping to be out, next year, hopefully, something like this. And so there's a lot going on. We're working on the book about the giants of ancient Britain. So please give a warm welcome to Jim Vieira.
That's better. Yeah. So everybody can hear me. Does that sound right? Good. Thank you for the warm introduction. I think in Hugh I found somebody as thorough and obsessive as myself. It's like the Seinfeld episode where Jerry and George are at the cafe and they say, together we're like one healthy human. So if we could merge our qualities, it would be great. But I really appreciate Hugh and Andrew putting this on. It's really a lot of work, and these things don't happen of their own volition. So I'm grateful, and grateful to have a full house of open-minded people. I feel like I could talk about things that, some people would just write off and dismiss without really investigating them. So I will get into my PowerPoint here and start with our book that Hugh and I worked on. And we did a show, Search for the Lost Giants, helped produce and create it for the History Channel. And as Hugh said, we did several others. There's a shot, me and Hugh, in episode 3. My brother and I did two-hour documentaries on the Lost Colony of Roanoke. At the end of the first, we worked with a team of archaeologists, and we found a Native American site that had never been found before. And we dug one test pit and found thousands of artifacts. And this site was football fields large, into the water, into the Chowan River in North Carolina. So when you film in real time, you're rolling the dice. You don't know what you're going to find. And we found this massive native site, which may be linked to the Lost Colony. And the last episode we just did, at the end, we found copper mines that we believe are missing for 500 years with massive walled construction, like an ancient Native American city that is being looked at by an archaeological team right now. So the gods have been with us in our filming, because it's really challenging. You have windows to do what you want to do when you're telling a story, and you want the audience to feel like you're doing the investigations they would want to see happen. So it's very fortuitous. So I'm a stonemason by trade. I studied economics at the University of Massachusetts. I like building stone towers all around my town. I built these, which is kind of neat. We've done a lot of work for a local theater, Double Edge Theater, all kinds of towers, walls, fountains, creations. We work with Goshen stone and Asheville stone and shape everything. Here's another example. We built this fountain, a lot of infrastructure. My brother took that stone and he used a diamond saw to cut the bird bath, which is really cool. And here's another one, clearly built by a race of giants. Actually, on our road where we live, Bug Hill Road in Asheville, Mass., we're rebuilding like 2 miles of stone walls. And in this section right here, you can see it's kind of obliterated. Brought in about 100 tons of stone, and we've been rebuilding it. We put 2 lintels in here and here so the water flows through. So that's what I do when I'm not doing stonework for professional jobs. I do stonework for fun. And I hang out Linus the cat. Linus is cool. He's got one blue eye and one yellow eye. And when Hugh visits, he gets them all wound up, so he bites me, and there's a lot of arguments that go on, but he's a very good research buddy. So my brother and I built this in our last life. So this is what I love to do. I'm fascinated by megalithic structures. So I've been around the world to ancient sites. And, I see all these sites like the Grand Menhir right here, 70 feet tall, 350 tons, at least 6,700 years old, and it's toppled over. And I wonder who built them and why. And we've been all around Brittany, Hugh and I, and our friend Howard Crowhurst worked with archaeologists and run through old records. And he claims that at one point there was 50,000 standing stones in Brittany alone, which is astounding. Some of them 6,000, 7,000 years old at least. So it's a really compelling place. It's like a forest of stones at Karnak. Everything's supersized too. It's really fascinating. So we've all sort of been Puma Punku and other ancient sites. And as a stonemason, what catches my eye is like these smooth plains. I work with a quarry, and my friend owns a huge diamond saws, and they cut, this hard stone. And I look at these things, and then I look in the museum, and I see the tools of the time, and I'm like, this really seems like you couldn't reproduce this. This is beyond my capability. So one of the episode ideas I have is get some incredible master masons and sculptors, give them the tools of the time and the stones, and see if they can do these interior cuts, as a proof of whether this is some kind of technology that pre-existed. And when I see things, here's Brian Forrester, like this pillowing stonework in Cusco, it's astounding. It's not that you can't get a razor blade between it, you can't get a micron between these seams, and they're all flawless. It's I don't know, astonishing is the word I would say. And I'm just coming in as an independent stonemason. I got no axe to grind or theory to support. I'm just like, what, WTF, basically. Sacsayhuaman's another place. You go through every stone and just see this incredible artistry and skill. And here's a Coricancha in Cusco, a temple. And this requires planning when you do cuts like this, when you do this kind of work. It's like a schematic. It's like a machine, a CNC machine made these things. And I know you're a savvy and open-minded crowd, so you've seen things like this in the past. But for me, as a mason, my first time there, I was astonished at all these sites. Even in Machu Picchu, you see the similar things. You see kind of run-of-the-mill construction that I could throw together. Then an earthquake separated this. And what you see is the stones aren't just joined on the seam. The entire thing, it's like curved, and all these stones are interlocking in the most wonderful fashion. So the entire stone is joined together like that. It's not just like the seam and it's loose behind it. So the thought and the planning and the attention to detail, once again, is astounding. Here's Machu Picchu. It's like, I'm going to do this just because I can. This is so hard to pull off. It really smacks of what Brian Forrester would say, a previous civilization. And actually, I like to point out that I'm glad Alan went before me, because I'm going to talk about the Sumerians. And a perceptual shift may answer the questions he had about a lost civilization. And we'll see if everything lines up. My son did all these fancy things with the slide. He's my tech guy. So this, Brian Forrester sent me this. This is a slide from the 50s. And it shows earthquake damage. And this Inca wall is built in front of this polygonal, tightly fit wall with these strange knobs you find all around the planet. And, it really shows that there were two different levels of construction that took place here. And then you see the fits after the fact, right? This kind of like lame stonework to fit in, after an earthquake or something like that. So you see several levels of repair that aren't as competent as the original builders. This is one of my favorite sites, Ollantaytambo. And these seams, this is hard stone, and the quarry is way over another mountain past a river. And not only moving the stones, but the flawless precision with which these are joined really begs the question, were they built at the time archaeologists say they were built, and by the people that were attributed to their construction? Once again, these walls, they go in and interlock. Like the planning, it just gives me a headache, is all I got to say as a stonemason. So I can't even look at it too much. It's astounding. And this is my last example of stonework. You just see the flawless seams. And it's really something that, begs the question, should we have archaeologists work with geologists, stonemason engineers to solve these problems? I say yes. I don't always get a warm reception, but I believe, yeah, why not? A multidisciplinary approach is what I look at. Like, when you go to the doctor and you get antibiotics and it saves your life, you're like, thank God. But if I'm going to take antibiotics for everything, it's just not the answer, right? So the doctor's probably not going to say, you might want to meditate, you might want to exercise, you might want to eat differently. Have a holistic approach to your health. Science does not have a holistic approach. It's like a limited data-driven segment, and it's very useful, but it doesn't solve all the answers, and it doesn't look at the human history in a holographic way, a holistic way. That's my contention anyways. And this guy, Edgar Cayce, in his readings probably said about the same thing that I just said. So Edgar Cayce, he was the son of a minister born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. So Cayce had this strange gift. He would go into a trance-like state, and he would give health readings. And doctors would bring their patients who couldn't be helped, and he became very famous healing people, often with natural means, or mostly with natural means. So Cayce would go into this trance-like state, and his source would tell him he was basically tapping into the Akashic records, the universal timeless records. And he started to give these strange accounts of past lives in Atlantis, in ancient Egypt. And the people, his sons and the people who work with him were fascinated. They kept asking questions about Atlantis. So what I'm going to do is do a comparative analysis of the Cayce material with the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Theosophists, Plato, religious documents, oral traditions around the world, and show that they're all saying the same bizarre and specific thing about the past. And this is what caught my attention. All these sources say that Atlantis existed in the middle of the Atlantic, that giants and little people were part of its population, that androgynous creator gods, or humans that were basically sexless beings, birthed humanity. I know that sounds like I'm on magic mushrooms, but bear with me. It's really a strange thing, but you'll see in the iconography, you will see this displayed across the world in myth, legend, and in every other, approach. And it's just really fascinating. So bear with me, I will say. So Cayce talked about Atlantis at length, but he wasn't the only one. That's what happened to Atlantis, supposedly. And, people want to know your opinion. After 30 years of this, basically, I'm sorry, did I miss one? No. My gut as a detective, who doesn't really have a lot of skin in the game, believes that what I'm going to lay out, this alternative view of history, is accurate, or predominantly accurate. And in 50 or 100 years, I think the version that I tell you will be accepted more as reality than what we have presently. And I'm not some big hero. I'm just doing a comparative analysis of pre-existing evidence. I'm just piecing it together. So I'm not trying to make a grand theory. I'm just, I want to display to people these interesting things that I found. So in one of Cayce's readings, this is what he says. Please give a few details regarding the physiognomy, habits, customs, and costumes of the people of Atlantis during the period just before the first destruction. So this is what Cayce says. They took on many sizes as to stature, from that as may be called the midgets to the giants, for there were giants in the earth in those days, men as tall as what would be termed today 10 or 12 feet in stature and well proportioned throughout. So we all know Plato, what he had to say about Atlantis. The primary ancient source for the legend of Atlantis was Plato. And skeptics say Plato's the only one who talked about Atlantis, and everybody just picked up on it. But the honest truth is Herodotus, who was born before Atlantis, before Plato, also talked about Atlantis. This is what he said. Herodotus, the father of history. Near the Salt Hill is a mountain named Atlas. After this mountain, these received their name, for they are called the Atlanteans. And he also refers to the sea beyond the Pillars of Heracles as the Sea of Atlantis. So he spoke specifically about Atlantis before Plato was born. So Diodorus, this is what he says. The Atlantides inhabited a rich country bordering upon the ocean and were esteemed to excel all their neighbors in civil reception and entertainment of strangers, and they boast that the gods were born among them. This is the place all the Greeks and the Romans believed was the land of the Titans and Mount Olympus. They are referring to Atlantis. This is Aeolian. In a word, this island is so delightful that it appears to be the abode of the gods rather than of human beings. That's Aeolian right there. So, Theopompus relates the particulars of an interview between Midas, king of Phrygia, and Cellenius. This is very interesting. Cellenius told Midas, Europe, Asia, and Libya are islands washed on all their shores by the ocean, and there is but one continent which is situated outside these limits. Its expanse is immense. It produced very large animals and people twice as tall as was common to our climate, and they live twice as long. That's another thing, that the first humans were spirit beings who were entrapped in physical bodies. That's what all these sources are saying. Evolution is a reality, and we know that, but the creation of Homo sapiens seems to be a supernatural event, all these sources are saying. So I must concede that. There is a supernatural aspect to what I'm saying. So science has a problem with it, but, just see what you think. And then the nature of animals. Those living near the ocean tell the tale that the ancient Atlantean kings, tracing their lineage from Neptune, wore bands made from the sea rams upon their heads. So it's clear all these great chroniclers are talking about Atlantis. Now we have Rudolf Steiner, whose spirit is probably with us right here. He says, everything that refers to giants in the legends is absolutely based on knowledge of the truth. We feel it to be absolutely correct from the spiritual scientific point of view that the giants are stupid and the dwarfs are very clever. And Hugh, in his talk, there is this idea that there was this malevolent race of giants that was created that was particularly dull and malevolent and cannibalistic. And you find it Native American, I sit in ceremonies with Native American spiritual leaders all the time, and they tell me these same things. And they always talk about the little people, too. It's really, incredible. And I have a doctor I see that escaped from Vietnam. He does Chinese herbal medicine, and his culture always talks about the little people in Vietnam. It's really incredible. So the Rosicrucian Fellowship, there are two prime facts that stand out. One is that there were giants in the earth in those days. The other, that the patriarchs lived for centuries, long-lived patriarchs, and this is the Rosicrucian Fellowship. And this is a full digest that was devoted to Atlantis. This is to show you that the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons have this as part of their philosophy. In this issue, we explore the mysteries of the lost continent of Atlantis, one of the most powerful and enduring ideas of the Western world and of Rosicrucian heritage. Rosicrucian science confirmed. An 8-foot skeleton there. It's in our book. This is one of the ones that was shipped to the Smithsonian, which has this nefarious, the Smithsonian is now some dark place like the Vatican, and I don't want to promulgate that. I will talk about my belief in academic conspiracies in a while. So this is from a Rosicrucian publication. We followed it up on the show, actually, and the cave that this was found in was flooded, but these enormous skulls were found, almost 10 feet tall. They don't have specific FEMA measurements, but it's a pretty wild story. So the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons are definitely involved in the belief that giants existed. Manly P. Hall, one of the greatest thinkers in Freemason history, Atlantis and the Gods of Antiquity is a full chapter in his book. Madame Blavatsky, the same thing. She talks about androgynous beings, giants, little people, Atlantis existing, the Great Flood. In the Bible, there's 26 mentions of giants, pretty specific. Here's one of them in Deuteronomy. A people great and tall, the sons of the Anakim, who you know and of whom you have heard it said, who could stand before the sons of Anak. And here's Flavius Josephus. In Hebron, there were till then left the race of giants who had bodies so large and countenances so entirely different from other men that they were surprising to the sight and terrible to the hearing. The bones of these men are shown to this very day, unlike the credible relations of other men. So Hugh and I, in our investigations, we team with Ross Hamilton, Micah Ewers, and other researchers, and we've essentially found over 1,000 accounts in the United States of 7-foot and taller skeletons, oftentimes by respected academics, heads of anthropology and archaeology departments in the U.S., and it's pretty straightforward. You have accounts in the New York Times, 9-foot tall, enormous skull, and they describe the Native American context, the specific burials, like seated facing the east or like spokes of a whale. So these unique burial patterns wouldn't be understood by a hoaxer. These are clearly legitimate reports of a stationary object. Quite frankly, the skeleton doesn't get up and run around. When a femur is measured at 29 inches, that's an over 8-foot skeleton. over and over again. You have this by respected individuals. So this isn't a subjective thing. This is just anatomical measurements. 9 foot tall, jawbone over the face. These specific accounts you find embedded and lost essentially in town and county histories, obscurely buried page 500-600, describing the same strange anatomic anomalies in an era of inefficient communication. As a detective, that just puts up a red flag, like, what the hell is going on? This isn't a hoax. These are anatomical measurements that, should be straightforward. So at the Chickasaw Mound in Arkansas, you have this account from the Field Museum in Chicago. They have like Sioux, the big T-Rex. They're a well-known institution. This is from one of their archaeologists down there. The skeletons are very large and tall. One femur bone was unearthed that was 29 inches in length. The skulls are extremely large. The jaw is such size that it would slip over my own and have considerable space to spare. There's over 100 of these accounts that we found, and some of them are, the skeleton was wired together, the town was abuzz, the largest man in town took the jawbone, whiskers and all, put it over his face and had room for his hands. So when you're dealing with an enormous skeleton, you're not dealing with pituitary gigantism. There's so many of these cases. You're dealing with just enormous skeletons over and over again. And it's stunning. We talk about in our book, where are the skeletons and things like that. It's kind of frustrating, but I think you'll see that it's really compelling. W.J. Holland, very well-respected paleoanthropologist, 1897 at the, I'm sorry, I'm going Rain Man. I want to get all these facts right. McKee's Rocks Mound in Pittsburgh. He finds between an 8 and 9 foot skeleton. This is a Scientific American right here. He works for the Carnegie. So that was unearthed there. And near Miamisburg in Ohio, right, we have this account from the head of the Smithsonian's Anthropology Department, 1897, Thomas W. Wilson. This is what he says. First of all, it's 8 foot 1.5 inches. There's a drawing of it. Anthropologists from all over the world are there. They're stunned. They list this skeleton with the largest giants of all time. And Wilson says this: the authenticity of the skull is beyond doubt. Its antiquity is unquestionably great. To my own personal knowledge, several such crania were discovered in the Hopewell group of mounds in Ohio. Pretty straightforward stuff, Then Edgar Cayce, which is, I think, fascinating. This guy had an 8th grade education. All he did was read the Bible. He was deeply offended by some of his own readings because he was so hardcore Christian. But he had 68 readings on the mound builders. And the mound builders is a fascinating group of civilizations that started around 500 BC, maybe 1000 BC. The Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian people inhabited the eastern half of the United States, and they built massive pyramids in geometric forms, like Cahokia. The Mississippians built this in Collinsville, Illinois. Grave Creek in West Virginia, 68 feet high, these massive constructions. And oftentimes, like this one, buried, there was a male and a female, 7 foot and 8 foot tall, listed in the archaeological record. These geometric forms that could predict eclipses, like the circle and octagon, very, very extraordinary mathematics and geometry. They understood the metonic cycle of the moon, the 18.61 cycle of the moon. Very high-minded stuff going on in ancient America. So you have there's a golf course that is part of Newark now, but this is what it looks like from an aerial shot, or what it would have fully have looked like. So these incredibly complex forms. And what Cayce said about the mound builders is that they came up to avoid the death cults in Mesoamerica, all the human sacrifices, and they were benevolently oriented, and they created a lot of these geometric forms as a ceremonial site to remember Atlantis, which sounds bizarre. But then you go to Portsmouth, Ohio. This is gone, but it was surveyed. And there are many forms like this, like Circleville, Ohio. And check it out. It's just like Plato's Central City of Atlantis. My buddy Greg Little in the book Mound Builders points this out. And archaeologists can never figure out why there's moats everywhere, and ditches and things like that. Even on the side of the Atlantic, you have the similar forms. So in the Smithsonian's own ethnology reports, there are 17 accounts of 7 foot and taller skeletons. One of my favorites here is from the 1873, this account. T.M. Perrin, Smithsonian archaeologist, reports, the skulls are very large, but fall to pieces on being exposed to the air. One skull was found that measured 36 inches in circumference. That is absolutely enormous, well out of human range. And there are a lot of accounts that Hugh and I just encountered just like this. Specific measurements, just listed, anonymously in some lost document. It's not jumping out. It's not headline grabbing. They're not mastodon bones or hoaxes. There's some mixed in, but not these. So, what is going on here, And a lot of people think, there's some vast conspiracy. And I work with professionals, and I'm friends with archaeologists, geologists, and, we have discussions. They don't always agree with me, but we have civil discourse. That's not always the case. One of the things is, I don't believe in academic conspiracies. You couldn't pull it off anyways. And it's not like, whatever. It's not like Enron. It's just a bunch of men and women doing what they think is their job. And I don't want to disparage anyone. I just want to point to, you're indoctrinated into a way of thinking, and you stick with it. It is just the ego. And here's a perfect example. This is Robert Schoch and John Anthony West. This is Geology 101, the weathering at the Sphinx. This is clearly weathered by water. It's incontrovertible, right? But this idea comes up, and you have Mark Lerner and Zahi Hawass, Egyptologists. They attack Robert Schoch and the whole idea. Geologists firmly agree. I agree. I'm pretty well versed in geology. That is weathering. There's no question about it. So that dates the Sphinx back, 7, 8, 10,000 years. But just the thought, I can't accept this because it doesn't fit what I've been working on, for all these years. So you get an arrogant, dismissive, person like Zahi Hawass who doesn't say, that's interesting, let's investigate more. He acts like a petulant child, and he just, insults everyone. And there was, a couple days ago, a new shaft or chamber was found in the Great Pyramid of Giza, right? And we don't know all about it, but the crew that did it, they kept Egyptologists out of it to remain impartial. So Zahi Hawass is quoted, and he insults them. He says there's nothing there. He's totally arrogant and dismissive. It's like, how about, that's interesting. Maybe there's another shaft in the Great Pyramid. Let's see what the science reveals. But it's that ego orientation that dismisses, just like Alan was saying. I'm pointing to a lost civilization that would answer maybe Alan's questions. And, I found it fascinating, right? He just laid out hard science and math, incontrovertible. But no way, that means there's a lost civilization that existed with Solutreans and Clovis people that was very advanced, that maybe lived in the middle of the Atlantic. And they passed that knowledge on after a great flood. No, I don't believe in the Bible. That's all crazy stuff. And I'm not religious. I'm a recovering Catholic. But I think the Bible is an important document. I think it was altered, and I think there's distortion in it, but it is another important document to look at. So I try to balance both worlds and not, just dismiss anything. So anyways, to go on with giants, all the early explorers you can name, Magellan, Drake, John Smith, Lawson, Coronado, they all documented encounters with enormous native chiefs, over 7 feet tall, over 8 foot tall, sometimes 9 foot tall, like in Mexico. And they specifically talk about the measurements, which is really astounding because the mainstream argument is that the Spanish were 5'2", and the natives were like 5'8" or 5'10". So they considered them giants, which just truly isn't the case. And in Patagonia, we have some pretty clear evidence of this right here. Drake, Magellan, as he was saying, for hundreds of years they encountered these enormous people. So Cook was 6 feet tall, and these people were pushing 7 feet that he met. It's really interesting here, though. Cook writes this. He claimed the Ona tribe he met in 1897 were from 6 to 7.5 feet tall. They wore animal skins, had horse strength and bull strength, and lived in simple wigwam huts made of tree branches. This really points to some anthropological curveball, the enormity of these people. This woman, 6'6". Cook took a picture of her. Looks like this isn't the only giant thing right here, but this guy's 7'2", just enormous. 7'4", another guy. So he photographed these people, and this tribe was decimated by the English, unfortunately, like so many other tragedies that buried our past. We burned the Library of Alexandria as a species. We destroyed the Mayan codices. We basically just threw ourselves back to the Stone Age. And anthropology and archaeology were created in the late 1800s, frankly, and they started from scratch. They pushed away 10,000 years of oral traditions and the accounts of religious documents. So they started from Darwin, they started from scratch, and that's why we're in the bind that we are, where we don't understand our past. So here's one cool report. So DeSoto's secretary says this: the new lands they explored were ruled by the giant Native American chief, Tuscaloosa. So he writes, seeing him, we paused, dumb with amazement, for though but a youth, he towered on high, a great-limbed giant, Heads of tallest men reached only to his breast. So these are the accounts over and over again, and they specifically talk about 7-foot and 8-foot giants. You don't want too many giants on the brain. You got to like switch gears. So this is cool. It's called the Codex Vaticano, and these Toltec people are killing this giant in the mountains of Mexico. So I'm going to shift gears to, there's a Bible quote, and there was yet a battle in Gath, where was a man of great stature, and on every hand 6 fingers, and on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number, and he was also born to this giant. So that's pretty specific. So what are they talking about in the Bible? 6 fingers and 6 toes. What does it mean? Thomas Henry Buckle in 1872 writes this: commentators have collected various instances of men who, like this giant, have 6 fingers on their hands and 6 toes on their feet. This is what Edgar Cayce said in a reading. He describes Muzuin, who traveled to the Gobi Desert, where he says there's a lost city of gold, from the lost Pacific continent of Lemuria in 926 BC, as being 6 foot tall, blue-eyed, hair dark gold, hand 6-fingered. Now, that seems strange and like, how do you verify that? But there are other accounts. Pliny the Elder said, the encounter between the Romans and the Seres, which they call the Chinese, and Taprobane, they exceeded the ordinary human height, had flaxen hair and blue eyes, and made an uncouth sort of noise by the way of talking. So what you have are these Tarim Basin mummies that were found also, Caucasoid mummies, between 6 feet and 6 feet 6 inches. So they have blonde hair, blue eyes, red hair. It's really a fascinating corroboration of what Cayce said years before in a trance-like state. And he talks about 6 fingers, which you find all around the world. In Utah, enormous feet, 6 fingers. This guy right here, this is from John Q. Jacobs. I haven't been to this site, but he has. He's a brilliant researcher. So this guy has nice feet. He has 6 fingers, enormous feet, 6 toes. Chaco Canyon, going up the side, 6 toes. This is from Illinois, Morse's Geographic Journal, 1838. Sorry, I'm trying to remember everything here. Giant foot right there. Petroglyph with 6 toes, once again, all around the U.S., all around the world. This is a Chinese cave, the Buddha, 6 fingers on his hands. And we'll get into more of what this means. Cayce would say, or the mystics would say, it is a trait of the first humans, of giants and people that were of a higher spiritual state that essentially created Homo sapiens. And we are the prototype with 5 and 5, smaller, 5'6" to 6 foot tall, or whatever our height is. We are the prototype for humans to exist right now. That's what the mystics would say, and that the giants died off eventually. This is 100 AD, a shroud, Egyptian shroud. 12 toes. This is very interesting. Ain Ghazal, some of the oldest statues in the world, 8250 BC in Jordan. Just like the site at Jericho, they found these statues, 6 toes. And the author of this report, Arid Ziffer, he writes that he believes these are representations of the first, like the deities. We call these people gods, or the ancient ones call these people gods, with 6 fingers and toes. And he wonders if they're the Rephaim of the Bible. Very interesting. A lot of academics got into this idea of 6 fingers and toes independently. And they wrote these really interesting things, like it's never been picked up that there were so many of these figurines from Cyprus that have 6 fingers and toes. Things like that, really specific, but they're working in a vacuum. This isn't a well-known thing, and it's not collaborated on because it's kind of weird, 6 fingers and 6 toes. I'm not getting into a Bible quote, things like that. So clearly this guy, Brian Forrester, gave me this in a Peru museum, 6 fingers on each side. This is quite strange right here. They found this bronze idol in, I think, 4000 BC in Kiev, and he has 6 fingers, and he's got these space boots on, so I don't know if he has 6 toes, but that's real. That's not like a fake artifact that you see on Facebook sometimes. That is a real find in Kiev. The Germans in 1938, they were probably searching for Atlantis under Himmler's orders. They went to Tibet and they found this axatite meteoric iron statue. It has the swastika there, and this guy has 6 fingers on each hand. It's really just stunning how you find it all over the world in isolated places. Palenque, where we're going on our tour, one of my favorite places. all over the place you find 6 fingers and 6 toes. This is Malik in Iran. I think it's 1800 BC. Most of the figurines have 6 toes. It's really fascinating. I think I'm sexually repressed, so I have too many of these slides. Yeah, it's just really astounding how many of these, it's very specific, right? It's not like, it's really jumping out at me anyways. This is interesting because a lot of these figurines are like, you'll see as I get into it, they're angelic or winged beings. And this is from Olympia in Greece. And all around the Middle East, from Turkey to Greece to Italy to other places, they had these sirens that were cauldron holders. And they had 6 fingers on each hand. Many of them did. Some had 5. Very odd. But they were like these winged beings. And I will get into what Casey talks about. He actually, in many of these sources, talk about basically hybrids being created in the past in ancient Atlantis. Basically, all the myths and legends we have about minotaurs and centaurs, they say was a reality. This genetic miscreation, this zoological nightmare. So this guy has 6 fingers on his hand, which is just another odd coincidence, if you will. This is in Cyprus, 3000 BC, quite old. And most of these figurines made of limestone have 6 toes. These isolated islands everywhere, same thing. This hunter, Cyprus, he had 6 toes. This Mayan idol here, he has 6 hands, and the little guy inside, 6 fingers, has 6 fingers as well. I think that's really funny. 1300 BC, Egyptian coffin lid, 6 fingers. Hugh talked about this. I can't verify this, but it's not like the Cardiff giant. It was never proven to be a hoax. It just disappeared. He has 6 toes, which is odd, 12 foot high. Austral Island, isolated Pacific island, at the Gauguin Museum outside. This guy, you can count him, 6 fingers. Isolated Pacific islands all around the world, the same thing. Right here, Kiribati, my buddy Eric von Daniken went here. That giant footprint has 6 toes in it. And this old man is standing in it. And there's giant graves and legends, just incredible, like everywhere else. That has 6 toes. When you see it, it is clear and obvious. And then we go to Easter Island. And frankly, I just found this account. I didn't even know it existed here. We know all the statues and the incredible stonework there, but there are petroglyphs with 6 toes on Easter Island. And this is from Georgia Lee's book, The Rock Art of Easter Island. And in Hawaii, there's also petroglyphs of 6 toes. So it just really, when you have Casey saying it and the Bible saying it, it's associated with giants, and you talk to indigenous people and they say these same things, it's really interesting. And it's in the collective imagination. This is Jan von Scorel, 1540. Adam, the original biblical Adam, was an androgynous being. The story of Adam and Eve was like a recreation of the original. That's what the mystics say. So Adam here has 6 fingers. It's associated with supernatural gods and androgynous beings. That's the case I'm making. And when you go over to Egypt at the temple of Esna, you have Kahum, who helped make humans out of clay. And you have these legends and myths and sites like this, I'll show you in a minute, that show humans being made, out of clay, essentially, birthed from androgynous beings. This temple was made for an androgynous, anonymous god. Kahum was androgynous. At the temple of Esna, he had 6 fingers on his hands. So this is where it gets strange. I used to try to be fake credible and stick with archaeology and stonemasonry and dating ancient sites, and I just said, the hell with it. I got to go with my intuition. I got to give my honest opinion about what I feel. And whatever happens, I'm scorned and ridiculed in some circles, and I just got to live with it because my gut as a detective tells me just investigate all these different angles, even the weird stuff like androgynous created gods. How do you make people without the right equipment? What does it even mean? So a primitive mind does not invent myths, it experiences them. All the comparative mythologists, I would say, are on the same page for the most part with this idea. So this is Casey's biographer, one of them, W.H. Church. In the early days of Milius's rule, this is way back in Atlantis, he's saying, the separation of the sexes had not yet begun to take place, though male in their outward aspect, the androgynous sons of God embodied within them the nature of both male and female in one person. Now that you see that in hermaphrodites today, that there's this aspect of positive and negative within every human, the ability to be male or female. And By turning to the creative forces, they could become channels to bring into being androgynous progeny after their own kind, imbued with a double soul in a double sex body. In this way, sexual intercourse was unnecessary as a means of propagation. Now, that doesn't sound too fun, but all these other sources are saying the same thing. In the Babylonian expedition, Hilbrick says this: the androgynous nature, this ability to beget out of himself, his own ego, this self-existence is inherent in each and every god of the Sumerians. All Sumerian gods are androgynous. Then we have this guy who shows up after the flood with his man bag. His name is Oannes, and he spread wisdom and mathematics, and we will get back to him. He was androgynous, also known as Dagon. You see the beard and the breasts, the representation of his androgynous nature. He showed up after the great flood, and they say he was a hybrid creature who would go sleep in the ocean at night. And just stick with me, it sounds weird. You go on the other side of the Atlantic, and at the Olmec side of Levanta, you have Quetzalcoatl with the man bag, and he was born of an androgynous father being Ometeotl. So he is an androgynous demigod who showed up after the flood, rocking this crazy man bag and sharing wisdom with everyone. So these cultures were not supposed to be connected. It's very odd. Then Viracocha, who's right down here, he's rocking the God Self icon, and I will get into him as well. He showed up after the flood. He is the androgynous creator god in Peru. But it's very specific in the text. This isn't some ethereal idea. This is what is said. At the top of the cosmological order was the androgynous divinity, Viracocha. Pachacuti Yamcui leaves no doubt as to Viracocha's sexual duality. For above his, her image are the inscribed words, whether it be male, whether it be female, ideologies and class in Inca and Peru, a wonderful book. Another book, The Andes by Jason Wilson. Inti, the sun god, was himself issued from Viracocha, the androgynous creator at the center of the Peruvian religious culture for 2,000 years. Whether he was androgynous or not, all these sources are very specific about it. Plato in his Symposium. Aristophanes displays knowledge of an ancient myth of the androgen, according to which our original nature was by no means the same as it is now. Excuse me. When the androgen was split into two halves, the distinct male and female sexes were created. So Plato was talking about this. And Plato is talking about Atlantis, and Plato is talking about the Great Flood. And it's just fascinating how this guy with an 8th grade education in a trance state is really lining up with all these unrelated sources. It's really fascinating. Reference to a race of androgens which once inhabited the world occur in the myths of both East and West. In the Western tradition, this primordial androgen is to be found in the writings of certain of the Kabbalists, Gnostics, Neoplatonists, Swedenborgians, and Theosophists. In the Rosicrucian Fellowship, mankind was male and female before being separated into two distinct sexes as man and women. During the period when man was thus constituted, fertilization must have occurred within himself, nor is this any stranger than that many plants are so fertilized today. I apologize for throwing so much at you, but I'm really trying to make this case that all these sources are saying the same specific and strange thing. So Steiner, he describes the point in evolution at which human beings split from being androgynous and single-sexed to becoming male or female. And the entire world is littered with androgynous deities. Native Americans, Zunis, the Aboriginals of Australia. It's just stunning. Everybody has an androgynous creator god, which I would say is not a creator god. It's more of a different kind of evolved human. And we've devolved into what we are now, kind of a warring, separate race of humans that's hopefully waking up from a nightmare. And that's what all the mystics are trying to do, is to wake us up to our real nature. And the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians said the same thing, and they carried this information in iconography through the Dark Ages, the androgynous nature of our being, our God self, if you will. So you see this iconography everywhere. Even the Templars, this is like, oh, it's Satan. No, it's the duality of different forces. There are breasts in the goat head. This is the androgynous aspect of human. And it's crafted in a way that the unconscious mind can understand what's being said. It's not like, oh, that's a goat person. There was a higher meaning in these symbols by the secret societies, which I spent a lot of time studying the works of the Rosicrucians and Freemasons. So we see this symbolism. This is really interesting. This is Johannes Richter wrote this book called Sky God Deus. These are all unrelated people, and they're saying the related things. It is hard to believe that people have already been devoted to a singular androgynous deity 20,000 years ago, but the Paleolithic sculptures are quite explicit. Many multi-headed sculptures have been found, and one of the oldest identifiable sculptures made of ivory of mammoth and found at Gagarion, Ukraine, is claimed to be 22,000 years old. So this androgynous representation is joined at the head. And another academic, this is Irid Ziffer. He explores the idea of androgynous created deities in the first Adam, androgyny in the Ayin Ghazal two-headed busts, a very interesting scientific paper. So Ziffer says that the two-headed busts are a representation of the androgynous being. And they occur at Ayin Ghazal, 8250 BC. So some of the oldest statues in the world are remembering this androgynous race. 6 fingers and toes, 2 heads. He even starts to talk about Göbekli Tepe, and this is like a really well-respected academic, that they might be, the T-shaped pillars might be showing this androgynous nature. So I'm very anxious to see further digging at Göbekli Tepe as well. And here are these 6 toes, 2-headed, these created deities being worshipped as an ancestor cult by some of the oldest, societies to have statues. And there's the 6 toes right there. This is what Ziffer says, I would like to suggest that these statues represented mythical ancestors from the dawn of mankind, and that the 2-headed busts among them represent the first human being, the androgynous prototype of humanity. So you see these 2-headed busts everywhere I think this is from Turkey, 2-headed busts. Janus, the Romans, the Greeks, everybody had the androgynous gods. It's really fascinating. Here's Kahum, the androgynous creator, crafting humans out of clay. And here's Thoth, the Atlantean king who showed up after the flood, who is androgynous, ibis-headed, and he's dealing with the ram-headed Kahum. And these beings are known to be androgynous, or at least that is the legend. He's writing down the years that this person's going to live. Hope he gives him a couple more. And once again, here is Oannes, or Dagon, the androgynous being who showed up after the flood. Here's the Australian Aboriginal deity. It's a long name I can't pronounce. So the world is littered with these androgynous deities. Boa Island in Ireland, the male and female, both sides of the statue, both heads. So obviously, it's tough to convey the androgynous aspects in a sculpture. So you have breasts and a penis or 2 heads. These things show up everywhere. This is what Casey said. This is where it gets weird if you thought it wasn't weird already. Many of these hybrid creatures of mythology, such as the satyrs, centaurs, and the like, are said by Casey to have inhabited the earth from the early days of progeneration in Atlantis. They were known as the Things. Casey talks about the sons and daughters of the law of one, of light, having a battle with these people called the sons of Belial, the ones who turned sacrifice into like human sacrifice. Casey says that you would build altars to sacrifice your separate self, the false self. You would get rid of hate and judgment, and you would have ceremonies that dispelled that had nothing to do with sacrifice. And these dark, selfish forces took over, and we see them in the world today. There are clearly people oriented to selfish, malevolent behavior, and there are people like this crowd who are oriented for the good of all. So that split existed, Casey says. And the sons of Belial created these things, if you will, to work in the fields, And some people say that this is like the Bigfoot creature, intelligent but trapped in an animalistic body. So make of it what you will, but there's more support for this idea. Casey said that the Atlanteans founded Egypt, and they created temples where they would surgically help these beings who had like half goat, half man. And I know it sounds strange, but hang on. So all around Egypt, you find these different chimera everywhere. And oddly enough, you also find, which I found interesting, is this, it's more like a creature of Greek mythology. So check this out. Berosus tells us Oannes, the fish god who shows up after the flood, he was a benevolent being who brought mathematics and everything else. This is what he says, and this great chronicler wrote it down. In ancient times, when there was nothing but darkness and water, strange creatures were formed in the fluid, including men born with 2 wings and some with 4 wings, and 2 faces, and had 1 body and 2 heads, and they were both masculine and feminine. and they had 2 sets of sexual organs, male and female. This is what this fish being who showed up with a man bag is saying, and here he is right here. So 500 years later, Eusebius of Caesarea says the same thing, essentially. And they produce double-winged beings, and more people with legs of goats and horns on their heads, and others cloven-hoofed, and more with horse bodies and human torsos. They also wrought bull-headed men and even other monsters, whose images remain in the temple of Belos, one next to the other. And here you go right here. You have goat people and these winged beings. All the specific crazy creatures are represented all over the place, all throughout the world, once again. And this is a Sumerian demon with the 4 wings. This is from Sumeria as well. So you'll look at these people, like the Sumerians were off the charts as a civilization. Were they really like delusional and they made up all these weird, winged beings and gods? It just seems irrational for such an intelligent people. Then you get to the Maya and the Inca and the Native Americans. And once again, I've sat with elders and it's like, these people have this shit together. You know what I mean? It's really pretty obvious that they're tapped into something that is true. So right here, you have this winged being again. And he is embodying the God Self icon, which I'll get back to, which is another fascinating coincidental aspect of this whole thing. So cylinder seals, you just see these weird beings, Is Casey right? Is Eusebius and Berosus right? Or Annas, are they right? Because I always wondered, science answers none of these questions, but this alternate, strange view of history that is agreed upon by all these different unrelated sources answers all these strange questions of lost worlds, myths and legends. It explains the crazy stonework around the world. It explains how civilizations can spring up overnight so sophisticated and why there is similar iconography all around the world. This version explains it. That's why it's very compelling to me. Why are you going to spend all your time creating goat beings and these winged creatures that are specifically talked about? Like Berosus, 4 wings, and these beings have man bags once again. Right? And then this Mayan god on the other side of the Atlantic, he has wings and he has a man bag. Right? Another winged being, like I said, these cauldron holders. This is from the early 1900s. I believe this is in the collective imagination of people. That's why it lingers. That's why this fascination with minotaurs and these other beings. The Fomorians, they showed up in Ireland and they fought Kukulkane, who had 7 fingers. And you can find that in Wikipedia. He was like this golden god from Atlantis who fought the evil Baelor from the sons of Belial. So this guy was a real a-hole, and he brought with him this zoological nightmare of all these beings. I like the fish guy. But it's embedded in myth and legend everywhere. It's just fascinating. Like Hugh says, everywhere you go, you get the same myths and legends. You talk to some elder in some Pacific island, and he's telling me the same thing that this Native American, Lakota chief told me. It's like, what is going on, Thank you. So back to what Casey said. So this minotaur, this creature, has 6 fingers. Just another specific alignment of these seemingly disparate ideas. So Casey talked about the sons of Belial, the sons of darkness. He talks about Belial over and over again being this leader in Atlantis who went to war and destroyed basically the civilization. And the last destruction was 12,000 years ago. And we know from hard science that the Younger Dryas impacts that hit the ice sheet in the United States basically caused this great flood and this cataclysm that has been denied by science and mocked for so many years. We know it is solid evidence now. So Casey is pointing this event 12,000 years ago. So after he dies, in Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls are found, and a large number of references to Belial are evidenced in the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is after Casey's long dead. In the war of the sons of light against the sons of darkness, one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Belial, is the leader of the sons of darkness. So this dude with an 8th grade education in a trance state is basically saying what is found in the Dead Sea Scrolls years after. And he also said that there were women in the order of the Essenes, which was not accepted by academics at the time. And then the Dead Sea Scrolls say that there were women in the ranks of the Essenes. So Casey was prophetic in many of these accounts. And it's just astonishing how he lines up. He'll say something, and then you'll see bizarre creatures with 6 fingers and toes on a temple wall. He could have had a team of 100 scientists and could not come up with a better con job if that's what it were. That's all I'm saying. So as a detective, like, you know, if you're looking into a case, you want to look at all these different angles, and you don't want to be fooled by coincidence. You look past that. So for as long as humans have been telling stories, there has been a fascination with the idea of creatures who are half human and half animal. The strength of this archetype can be seen in the persistence of modern tales of werewolves, vampires, Jekyll and Hyde, and a host of other monster horror characters. Why is this in our collective imagination? Why is Atlantis and a lost world and ancient technology? We just can't get it out. Not only is it myth and legend and oral tradition, it is just in the popular culture. It's just fascinating. And I talk to a lot of academics and a lot of skeptics, they run their mouth about like, oh, you just want to believe in a lost world because you can't deal with the regular world, things like that. And I'm like, no, wrong. My intuition, and many people's intuition, is pointing to this idea of a lost world. That's why people are fascinated with Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings. And the gradualists and the uniformitarianisms, their minds can't handle the enormity of the true story of human civilization. So they hide in these academic realities where everything is nice and slow. I would say you people are the brave and the courageous ones who can think open-mindedly. And I don't want to disparage. I'm just saying that is a small way of thinking. That's bad science, too, to not incorporate every different, angle or avenue of evidence you can follow. So I believe that these things are in our collective consciousness for a reason. Whoa. So in an effort to unravel the history of the past, I've sat in many ceremonies, ayahuasca ceremonies with shamans and medicine men, and I've heard versions of reality and I've experienced versions of reality that are wild, that are incredible, that are multidimensional, and it's not some drug trip. You deal with, the horror of the pain of the world. You deal with deep psychological seated stuff comes up, very challenging, sitting for 12 days in meditation and ceremonies. And the friends, my shaman friends, just give this brilliant alternative history of the world that is in alignment with what I'm saying. And this happens in Ecuador and Peru and in different places all around the world. It's very odd. And I sat with my friend, stop the ride, I want to get off. Santiago is a San Pedro shaman. And he told me about his ancestors building Machu Picchu. And he said, go to the hitching post of the sun, because it was built as an amplifier of intent. And whatever prayer you give there, the ancients would want it amplified. They used geometry and mathematics, and they understood ley lines and things like that. And just like Alan said, where do these people come up with this knowledge? We live alongside, with our skyscrapers and satellites. Aboriginal people don't even know we exist. 50, 100,000 years ago, the mystics will say, in the middle of the Atlantic, existed Atlantis, an advanced civilization that after it was destroyed, shared the knowledge and repromulgated society. So maybe that's the answer to the solution. Man bags. Graham Hancock first pointed this out for me, but I've been on this case for a while. So you have the crazy man bag that all these beings are carrying. Winged Anunnaki Sumerian guy has it. So what's with the wings? There's another man bag. It's just fascinating how many there are all around the world, right? And in Sumeria, this is a ziggurat of Ur. We have Plimpton 322 that was just analyzed. Alan, I don't know if he's here still, may appreciate this. So our research reveals that Plimpton 322, that cuneiform tablet, describes the shapes of right-angled triangles using a novel kind of trigonometry based on ratios, not angles and circles. Mansfield said it is a fascinating mathematical work that demonstrated undoubted genius. It's actually a new way to do trigonometry. It is off the charts, and it's been decoded. And where did these people come from? And this is the guy with the man bag who showed up and shared the arts of civilization and mathematics. That is in the Sumerian texts. It's just fascinating that level of mastery existed within the Sumerians. And they're like eagle people with four wings that are their gods, and they were all carrying the man bag. To me, this is like a really specific, just incredible coincidence. And our fish buddy has the man bag here, and these angel beings have the man bag. And there are man bags in museums all around the world, which is quite fascinating. And they're not just in the Middle East either. You find them at the Olmec site. And here you go, once again, the Mayan site. I don't know who this dude is, but he has a man bag. That's from central Mexico. This guy, 1800 BC from Colombia, he's got a man bag. this is kind of strange. You know, everybody thinks it's some kind of technology, but these beings, they're called the Atlantides, I think, in Hidalgo, Mexico, I believe. They're carrying some kind of man bag. At the Bishop Stone in Ireland, this guy has a man bag. And Andrew and I are probably going to have a fight about this later. But I think these are man bags on Pillar 43. And we'll see when they excavate further if there are more specific ones. I think he thinks they're vulture boxes, and I don't know who's right until we build a time machine. But it's fascinating that Göbekli Tepe is starting to embody some of these things I'm talking about, androgynous creator gods. And I will get into that later in a private discussion with Andrew. I'm fascinated to figure it out. So this is my buddy Richard Cazzaro. He wrote a couple books, which I'll show you. But Viracocha, the androgynous creator god, is above the gate. He's embodying the God self icon, which is found all around the world, and I will show you that. It's really fascinating. So Bes, the Egyptian dwarf god, is also doing it on this doorway. And you find it in doorways all across the world here, not just in Peru. This God self icon, right? So what does it mean? It's the balance of opposites. It's the integration of the separate self with the higher self, the embodiment of our true spiritual nature. It is part of a lost religion of Atlantis. That's what the mystics would say. The correct good of all, oriented to the good of all, the understanding of the holographic nature of reality. And you find the specificity is really incredible. 2 snakes in each hand in Peru and Egypt, 1 snake in each hand in other places. If I had like 15 hours, I would keep hammering you away with this kind of stuff, and I don't want to do that. I hope I'm not bumming you out. But to me, it's so fascinating how much there is and how much symbolism is just entirely similar. And you find this all around the world. I just find it utterly fascinating, right? And this Babylonian winged being, he's doing it once again. And these man bags have these guys embodying the God self icon. And I talked to Richard. A lot of the beings like this guy are known to be androgynous. And he said, yes, I found that in my research too. I was just fascinated when I was in Peru. I kept looking at Viracocha. I'm like, who is this guy? You know, it's like, you know, if I was hooked up to a lie detector test, I'd say he's like this Atlantean advanced being who showed up after the flood. And I just got to, you know, you start talking about, you drop the A word, and it's like, this guy's out of his mind. But, you know, I just feel compelled to share this. And I hope it, like, you know, all resonated well. But if I just didn't put as much information in, I don't think the point would be made. Just the fascinating collection of disparate sources saying the same specific and bizarre thing about the past is extremely compelling. And I'm just a freak, you know. I'm just going to continue to dig into this. And like I said, Hugh has a similar mind. And I'm really grateful for all the researchers who've done the work. Somebody like Alan, right, who's done this incredible amount of research. And he's really incontrovertibly, mathematically proven this thing. But it's dismissed because you're talking about a lost civilization. As simple as that. A perceptual shift can drag us to truth, right? Like right now, we could be experiencing different levels of existence coming in and out of our, you know, our time frame here. Inflation theory and quantum mechanics are talking about multiverses, you know. Let's have an open mind and let's use science the way it should be used in the service of spirit, in the service of something larger. And that's the problem. It's like male-dominated, left-brained. You know, I'm sorry, you go to the doctor, and I'm grateful, but there's not this holistic approach to science. So I encourage everybody to, you know, have a holistic approach, and I'm grateful that everybody here, you know, has that. Oh God, you know, has that disposition. It's really heartening. You know, I feel at home here. You know, it's really a cool experience. So Liz's line is pretending to be a stuffed animal. I know I'm a weirdo. I used to have 17 cats. I took in a bunch of cats to care for them, then we gave them like to our friends and stuff, so I really love cats. It's my Egyptian reincarnation. As Hugh said, we're doing this tour, and it's going to be really cool. And if you can go, I'd really recommend it. It's fascinating. Brian Forrester, he's brilliant. He's a really sweet guy. His wife, Irene, is really nice. Hugh, I grudgingly must say, is a brilliant researcher who knows everything about the Olmec. And I'm the guy who will buy you a beer. So that is it.
Thank you, Tim.